AudioJungle.
I'd like to introduce Daniel Kraft, the Medicine and Neuroscience Chair at Singularity University. Please come up and join me.
Thanks. Thanks, Natasha. So it's a real honor to be here in Boston, and I have the challenge of about 15 minutes of sort of painting a little bit of a picture about the future of health and technology and how it's going to impact the future of cancer as well. And obviously, it's a really interesting era in technology and is enabling us to really shift our thinking in interesting ways. But often, we're sort of still stuck in the past. I trained down the street at Mass General in both internal medicine and pediatrics. I was back there recently, and I always love to tell the story of visiting the Ether Dome. Here's the old house staff I trained with. The Ether Dome, which is frozen in time from 1846, hadn't changed that much in comparison to the ward where I spent my first month as an intern back in the 90s, also kind of shockingly undifferent. And we're in this new connected age, this digital age, this genomic age. We need to think differently as we move into the future, particularly in oncology, not just by buckets of body parts and subspecialties, and reshape and reframe our modes if we're really going to have a big dent on cancer across the spectrum. So in these few minutes, I'm going to cross technologies and look at a little bit about how they're impacting prevention, diagnosis, therapeutics, even global health, and how we might even think differently about clinical trials in cancer and beyond. So if you think about our healthcare system today, it's really much more of a sick care system. We live in a world where our technology or our systems are sort of built upon intermittent data. It might be the random blood pressure check, EKG. We're still mostly faxing, if we're lucky, our data from home back to our clinicians. And therefore, we're very reactive. We wait for the heart attack, the stroke, or the lump to be discovered at stage 3 or stage 4. And I would argue with our new technologies in cancer especially, we can be more continuous and more proactive and move out of the model of, the 30-minute wait for the 12-minute clinic visit. And even though technology is moving very quickly, it's often the culture and also the incentives that play such a critical role, especially in the world here in the US. We don't practice evidence-based medicine. It's more reimbursement-based medicine. And as we move to this value-based economy and healthcare and beyond, and the incentives shift to the left, we'll have more incentives to pick up cancer, prevent it, and treat it early. So one of the meta shifts is also happening, and I'm trained, by the way, after here in Boston, I went and trained in pediatric hematology, oncology with subspecialty in bone marrow transplantation, is seeing, where therapies happen. It used to be in the ICU, the clinic. Now technologies and the pressures of payment are taking healthcare to the home, and increasingly technologies onto our body to shift how this is done. Other meta trends that are affecting healthcare are transparency. The new empowered patient is the new drug, owning their information, able to see and compare centers. And a lot of this is technology-based, is riding Moore's law. The power of the smartphone in our pocket has about a billion times the price and speed of performance of a supercomputer at MIT in the 1970s. And Moore's law is an example of an exponential. And I want you to think today about the exponentials and how that can impact cancer. So we all tend to think linearly. If I took 30 linear steps, I'll be to the door. But if I took 30 exponential steps, doubling, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, et cetera, by the 30th step, I'm actually at a billion. That's 26 times around the planet. And that's happening not just with Moore's law, it's happening in many fields. This is why our desktop of 2000 now fits in our smartwatch. And now that we have computers the size of a grain of sand, the Internet of Things is coming to the Internet of the body and the Internet of healthcare. And it's not just Moore's law that's moving exponentially, it's many technologies, and it's at the convergence. And I think the future of cancer is going to be blending technologies from 3D printing to robotics to big data in many impactful ways to reinvent as we move forward. When we think about the future of cancer, it can move into this world of what's often called digital health or M-health or connected health. Soon I think it will be called health and medicine. But we have new opportunities to use these new systems to address many of the grand challenges across health and medicine, from the big data. It's great to have big data, but how do we make it actionable information for the oncologist, for the clinical trialist? How do we unfragment and share information across systems? And how do we even help our friends, the payers and the regulatory bodies, live in an exponential age as we move forward? So disruptions all around us, many examples in our common lives of things that are completely different compared to 10 or 15 years ago. Uber's a great example. It's only a 5-year-old company. It didn't invent any of its platforms, the smartphone, the online payments, online maps, but they've disrupted the travel world. And I like to ask the question, who's going to build the Uber of healthcare, or maybe even the Uber of oncology? There's already companies like the couple here, Pager, press a button on your app in New York, and a doctor comes to your house or apartment and checks you out. Not sure what kind of doctor you get, but you get a doctor. And remember, they can rate you and you can rate them. Even Uber themselves did a little pilot where you could press a button and have a nurse come in a Uber car and give you a flu shot. So disruption's coming. Our challenge is to be the disruptor, not the disruptee. And I think it's a really interesting era as we move forward. I get a chance to look at this as the chair of medicine at Singularity University, based in the heart of Silicon Valley. We bring smart folks together to unsilo their brains and look at AI, robotics, big data, 3D printing, and beyond, and ask how can we use these to address the world and make a dent, including as many of our teams and projects come out in the world of healthcare. And because so much of healthcare tends to live in interesting clinical silos, I started a program a few years ago called Exponential Medicine, where we bring clinicians, IT, roboticists, beyond the spectrum together to look at where technology is moving and how it can reinvent everything from primary care to cancer care. So let's take a look at a few areas briefly and how they touch cancer and ourselves and our patients in the future. First of all, health and prevention. It's our behaviors that have more of an impact of our cancer risk in many cases than just our genomics or genetics. The new drug is really, again, the empowered patient. You should be the CEO of your own health, but you should also potentially own your data, be able to share it, crowdsource it, change the way clinical trials are done. We need to involve our patients from the whole spectrum of drug development to therapeutics. We know that in this world of sitting is the new smoking, exercise and movement is impactful preventing care and managing our cancer patients. And we have new tools now in this era of quantified self that are enabling us to track and monitor single patients, clinical trials in interesting ways. And I think we're moving from the era of quantified self, things on our wrist, to things of more quantified health, which can enable us to do a better job from diagnostics to therapy. These wearables are disappearing to insidables. You've heard about Google and their contact lens, partnering with big pharma now to do sensors based on the eye. We're going from insidables to even things like trainables, things that can give you feedback in real time, like a posture sensor that buzzes your back. And these sensors are continuing to evolve from the 1.0 tracking your sleep and steps to smart pills with RFIDs that can tell whether a patient's taken their meds and improve adherence. And of course, they're disappearing into the Internet of Things, into our clothes, into our cars, even into our diapers, right? This used to be the future, but last year Huggies came out with TweetBee, the connected diaper. That could be useful, or other sorts of data. So again, from the sort of tracking yourself for fun, but to elements that can impact healthcare, even quantifying emotional states from your smartphone and other realms are going to be impactful. MIT is now able to do a new project using Wi-Fi to pick up vital signs. And so we'll see seamless ways of collecting data that are going to be really impactful in understanding normal values and when we move forward. And in a sense, we'll always start to be online, for better or for worse, with our connected bodies, which gives us interesting opportunities. Just in the last year, you don't need to log into every single device. It can flow through your smartphone, and now increasingly directly into your medical record. So we'll be able, as clinicians, to prescribe devices and apps, have that data flow back and use it in meaningful ways, and start to understand, what are the baselines? What's a patient on chemo doing? When are they sensitive to fever and neutropenia? And be able to leverage that and score them so we can improve outcomes. It's not going to just get being paid for the drug and length of a few more months of life, but other qualities that we can start to integrate, kind of like a FICO score for health. Now, the challenge with all these quantified pieces of data in this digital age is it's overwhelming. What does the data mean? I like to think of this, I don't know if I made up the term, predictalytics. How do we know where the trend lines are going? As an ICU doc, you look at lots of data, you make sense of it. How do we pick up those trends early? How do we build, essentially, with the integration of this digital age, a check engine light for the body, or a bit of an ONSAR system to make sense and integrate this information to be a GPS for healthcare, for the oncologist, for the cancer patient, for their family. Daniel, go right to the gym, not left to the McDonald's. Will be ways of tuning our therapeutics. And as we can have access to this as a consumer or patient, continuously on our wrists, we can start to make sense of this and have it nudge us in the right directions. And soon we'll actually have this wherever we might be. Sometimes we should unplug, so we'll have connected data in interesting places, but it's a fast-moving era. And again, we're starting to see companies start to integrate the Internet of Things from the home to make sense of this so we can be more proactive, whether it's managing a patient on chemotherapy or a patient with heart failure. And we're going to connect this increasingly with coaches. You might get pamphlets and instructions and be told by the oncologist what to do, but when you have a coach, a real coach, or in some cases AI coaches, and you can have insight into your information and the data. It might be a mirror you look in every morning that can track your vital signs, help you track your medical adherence. We'll have a different era. We'll have the mirror of the future you when you look in the mirror, and it might help you do your workouts and have insights into how you're doing. Or if you're having Dunkin' Donuts every morning, future you, there you go, future you. Those sorts of realms will help tune behaviors of our clinicians and our patients. When you see yourself today and future you, I'll skip my Dunkin' Donut in the morning. Smoking cessation. Show someone what their skin is going to look like from smoking can play a role in reducing lung cancer risks. And this is blending with augmented reality. We can see the world in new ways, which you may not think about in the therapeutic realm, but augmented reality, which is coming to cardboard versions, is going to play a role in educating clinicians, surgeons. You can be in the operating room, seeing what's going on. We're seeing virtual reality and augmented reality blends, so the clinician, through things like Google Glass, can see their environment or learn anatomy or have situational awareness. Other parts of health prevention and optimization come obviously from genomics. We're going to hear from many folks in this space. The cost of sequencing a genome from our friends at Illumina is now to about $1,000, dropping at twice the rate of Moore's law. The challenge still is what happens when the patient presents with their genome. How do we start to integrate that into the workflow? Because it's all about the workflow for the clinician, not just the data. There's even low-hanging fruit, pharmacogenomics, basic risk factors and what drugs I might take. Here's my data from 23andMe. I can see my risk data. What if that starts to flow into the EMR so your primary care doc can do smarter cancer prevention or other preventions based on your own data? You can even upload your 23andMe data, as I have, to a website that looks at your athletic genes. And it's pretty on target. I was a fast runner, never good at long distance. I like to do a workout, but I have trouble getting up in the morning to do it, but I have an excuse. My motivation genes are low. So interesting ways to integrate genomic information to the point where I think Illumina spun out and funded a company recently called Helix, which is going to be an app store for your genome. So really interesting new ways to address this. Now, of course, it's well beyond our genomics today. The exposome, the microbiome, as you all are aware, is playing a really important role now as we understand in everything from inflammatory bowel disease to obesity to maybe even psychiatric disorders, and the interplay with the GI and the gut and cancers of the GI system. Down the street where I changed at Boston Children's, obviously we're starting the era of fecal transplants, and I think we'll see that play a role in many other therapeutics. Jamie Haywood, who you'll hear from later, from patients like me, even as a soap that'll replace your skin microbiome. No showers needed, apparently. Other ways to impact health prevention and cancer and beyond are using old school technologies to tune our brains, yoga, meditation, new abilities to have wearable devices that can track our brain states. Maybe I'll prescribe a device like this for a patient to do mindfulness or meditation if they have anxiety related to their cancers or other therapeutics. We're seeing brain-computer interfaces get much more advanced at MGH and my alma mater, Brown University, and able to connect the mind of a quadriplegic patient to control their environment. So lots is happening in that realm, including, as you may not think about it, video games to tune our brains to do preventative measures or to be proactive in cognitive deficits. So video gaming, something you might not think of, has even been used at Stanford as a pediatric hem-onc fellow to get our kids to stay on top of their medications, a platform called Remission. Diagnostics, clearly important across healthcare. We as oncologists often pick up diseases stage 3 or later. I like to see an era of stage 0 medicine as being modeled a bit with the role of Alzheimer's. Hard to do anything about it when it presents clinically, but there are now PET scans, blood-based biomarkers, even eye tracking technologies that can pick that up early, and I think we'll start to see that model come to the oncology realm. The diagnostics of the cancer patient are going to move to this digital era. I can have a digital doctor's bag in my pocket, lots of new tools from otoscopes to EKGs that can fit on your smartphone. So we'll see the disappearance of old school diagnostics now to fit on smart attachments for our mobile era. The EKG on the phone can be impactful for cardiology, but also for managing cancer patients on cardiotoxic drugs. Or now patches that are essentially, I'm wearing one now, that's connected to the cloud, can transmit ICU level data through a smart patch for $3 or $4 a day, from steps to EKG to temperature. Really interesting ways to blend this information into our clinical endeavors. And once you may pick up something like cardiovascular disease or cancer, we're going to change our way of doing diagnostics. The convergence of imaging, sending data, in this case, from a CT scan up to the cloud, will replace the traditional angiogram with a virtual angiogram. And I think across cancer diagnostics, we'll be picking up imaging doing similar elements to see, for example, does that patient need a stent or a bypass? So we might even 3D print the stent for that patient and start to really blend this information in powerful ways, replacing echoes with 2-minute MRIs and making sense of this information on the fly. Part of healthcare innovation and the future of cancer is incentives. I've been involved with the XPrize for several years. We've designed a $10 million prize sponsored by Qualcomm to make a medical tricorder to bring diagnostics to the home. This is one that just shipped to 10,000 patients as part of a clinical trial. Picks up heart rate, EKG, temperature, blood pressure, communicates to your smartphone, layered with IBM-type intelligence to make sense of this. This will be part of the empowered consumer or cancer patient in the future, having these at home to help triage and manage disease. Or simple tests can now be replaced by dipping a urine dipstick and now taking a picture with a smartphone for managing diseases remotely and democratizing analytics across the planet. As we think about diagnostics, we can even print out diagnostics on paper. We're obviously in the era of microfluidics. This is going to play a critical role again in the stage 0 medicine, the tissue biopsy replaced by the blood biopsy. One of the companies from Singularity University has done this with smartphones and cheap platforms to do microRNA-based cancer diagnostics, which again can democratize cancer care across the planet. And with all these new diagnostics and wearables and digital tools, we need new ways to make sense of this. Not just AI, but what I like to say is IA, intelligence augmentation. And groups like Watson are already working on the oncology space to help make sense of this explosion of diagnostics and therapeutic options as we personalize therapeutics. And AI and mobile is combining so we can do smart prevention at home, whether it's picking up a mole or using a digital bathymeter to pick up a lung cancer early. And of course, these are just enabling tools, particularly in the patient-doctor relationship in the oncology world, so important. They can help us spend more time on those important elements. Briefly, the future of therapy, something we're going to talk a lot about here today. It goes well beyond the pill. We're now in the world of the connected pill, though, by the way. Cardiac and other sort of pacemakers are playing a role in many parts of healthcare. I talked to Bob Langer last night. They've developed a contraceptive with remote control, which raises interesting questions. You know, honey, where's the remote? Or what happens if someone hacks your medical implant? But part of therapy, especially in cancer, will be prescribing apps to help patients track their disease, manage their meds, pre-op care, post-op care. We're seeing this reduce heart failure readmissions in the cardiovascular realm. We'll see the continuing explosion of telemedicine, the ability to talk to your nurse practitioner or oncologist through smartphones, to manage things like fever and neutropenia remotely, proactively, using wearable sensors and apps. Robotics is part of therapeutics, whether it's things like robotics to do surgeries, robotics to deliver medications, robotics to help the folks who are disabled from a variety of modalities, even blending robotics now with things like 3D printing to match the patient's anatomy, so a quadriplegic patient or paraplegic patient can walk. And 3D printing is something you may not think of, let's say, in cancer care, but it's coming to our orthopedic realm, to neuroscience. We can even put printers on the space station to print medical instruments. I can carry mini-me in my pocket, which might be kind of cute, you know, but if I have a patient who's lost part of their face from a cancer, to make a 3D printed prosthetic could be powerful. Or I met Stephen Keating, a postdoc at MIT recently, who self-diagnosed himself with lung cancer, with brain cancer, and 3D printed his tumor to help his surgeons do a better job of taking it out. Really empowering story. 3D printing is blending with stem cells and regenerative medicine in powerful ways. We're in the early era of being able to print microorgans to do smart screening and drug development. And as we know down the street at Wyss, the ability to even make organs on a chip will be an important part of discovery and therapeutics. I come from the bone marrow transplant world. Very briefly, part of innovation is unmet need. When I was a bone marrow transplant fellow, spending an hour or two harvesting bone marrow in the operating room, I came up with a better way, a minimally invasive approach called the marrow miner, which we have FDA approved in the clinic to do a single puncture and harvest bone marrow very rapidly with again, one puncture and a local anesthesia. And obviously, bone marrow transplant has been an important era of therapeutics. And I did work as a postdoc with Irv Weissman, where we also looked at ways to get rid of radiation and chemotherapy instead of the traditional way, using antibodies to the disease, to hematopoietic stem cells, and replacing them in novel ways. So new ways to blend stem cells, immunotherapy, and beyond. I'm very short on time. I'll just mention other therapeutics that are coming, obviously with CRISPR and beyond, are going to shift therapeutics in novel ways, including in cancer care, the early ways of correcting some hematologic disorders. Immunotherapy, one of the big discussions here today, is moving quickly. My mentor again at Stanford, Irv Weissman, is pushing a whole new approach with anti-CD47, the don't eat me signal, which I think is going to be increasingly important as an impactful chemotherapy, antibody-based approach. And so immunotherapy getting very interesting. 2 last points in the last 30 seconds. Global impact. How do we take cancer care and democratize it across the planet? How do we pick up disease early using telemedicine, point-of-care diagnostics, the ability now to have the bottom billion who are all on SMS phones, soon on smartphones, connected to the cloud with things like Google's Loon. Lots of ways to democratize this, even delivering drugs and vaccines through drones, which are having interesting abilities, whether it's delivering a defibrillator or beyond. Last point would be discovery. Cancer care, developing drugs is extremely expensive, as many of you know. We need new exponential thinking around this to take data from multiple data sets, or EMRs, publicly available elements, and sometimes even repurposing drugs, as Atul Butte at UCSF has done, old school drugs being applied to cancer in new ways. And finally, clinical trials can be part of this new empowered age, as mobile can be a way of delivering a clinical trial. Many of you have seen ResearchKit. You can download clinical trials for Parkinson's, for cardiovascular disease. I think we'll see that coming to oncology, where you download a trial, deliver the drugs, and have that information come back in a often crowdsourced way. Just like when you drive with Google Maps or Waze, you can build a map of Rome in a day. That kind of thinking can come to healthcare. We share a little privacy, but we get our speed and location and the traffic back. I think that thinking can come to healthcare, and we can all not just be organ donors and blood donors, but data donors across pharma, hospital systems, and beyond. So as we move in this exponential age, I encourage you to think about, as Wayne Gretzky says, where the puck is going. It's an exciting era. I think that the future of cancer is going to be the convergence of all these things: mobile, diagnostics, omics, crowdsourced AI-enhanced feedback, and beyond. And we need to think in this new realm if we're going to move from our sick care era of episodic and reactive care to one that's much more continuous and proactive. And many of these technologies, some of them are in my pocket, are obviously here. It's up to all of us who are really, I think, lucky to play a role in the future of healthcare, not to just predict the future, but go in there and create it together.